Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kirk Wilson from the security team here at LRS in the IT Solutions Division. Welcome back to our webinar on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. This is part two, the second session, and we'll just jump right in. So, just in case anybody missed it and isn't exactly aware of what CSF is, I don't want anybody flying blind through the rest of the presentation. So for those of us who were with us for part one, please bear with me for just a few minutes while we get into the basics. We won't rehash every foundational element. The cybersecurity framework, or what most people are going to call CSF, it's a voluntary framework. It was developed by NIST and with the collaboration of some industry leaders and the government to put together standards, guidelines, and practices that promote the protection of critical infrastructure. Was the initial rollout, but what we have found is it applies to any type of infrastructure. There are lots of reasons to align to a cybersecurity framework, especially the NIST cybersecurity framework. We're not going to get through all these details today. The first week's presentation, the part one, has got talking points for all of these, and if you would rather, we're happy to have a conversation with you live. Reach out and we'll talk about this. But overall, I just want to continue to remind everybody there are lots of good reasons to align to a cybersecurity framework that go beyond just we're required to do so for regulatory reasons. So you may remember that as part of the cybersecurity framework, we have what's called the framework core. And that's broken down into 5 functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Through the series of this webinar, we'll be covering the first 4. Last week, we covered identify. Today, we'll be getting into the protect function. And as you can see here, in purple, the protect function, it breaks down into these categories: identity management and access control, awareness and training, data security, information protection, processes and procedures, maintenance, and of course, protective technology. Protect is just what it sounds like. It's safeguarding our environments, our systems, and our data. What's great about CSF alignment is that it really helps us think through every aspect of protecting our organizations. I think if we were to put a poll out there amongst ourselves, amongst each other, technologists and professionals about, what comes to mind when we say protect our information systems. We'll commonly hear things like encryption and least privilege and access control. But CSF takes it deeper than that. It takes it absolutely as deep as it needs to go to cover those areas and a lot more, right? So as we look at the subcategories in the protect function, we can see that NIST, they've really looked at protecting our organizations through the lenses of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which, the CIA triad for the CISPs out there, or those who have studied some of the principles of information security. They've really taken that look at it through the lens of the CIA triad, and we're out to protect information systems and document the subcategories accordingly. The tagline here, that's from NIST themselves: develop and implement the appropriate safeguards to ensure delivery of critical infrastructure services. I like to draw attention, develop and implement. Realistically, each of us individually or within our departments or staff, we aren't going to have the time, and sometimes we won't have the capabilities to develop these safeguards ourselves. Today's information systems, there are too many of them, right? They're too great in number. They're too different in purpose. They're too quick to change in how they operate. Just with all the different versions that come out all the time, not just of operating systems and patches and everything else, but the software itself. Everything changes too quickly. So most organizations I come across are doing pretty much everything they can do just to develop the minimum set of policies and processes around protecting the assets. let alone trying to develop the protection systems themselves. So again, just to kind of bring in the intent and the focus of the series is as we move over to Pat a little bit later on, he'll get into off-the-shelf solutions that are great complements to aligning with a framework, specifically NIST CSF. So as we look at the subcategories of the protect function, this is where things are going to get specific, all the way down to, if you look at the far right column, the second option, PR.PT-2, removable media is protected and its use restricted according to policy. So that's very specific. We're talking here, of course, about controlling USB drives or DVD drives or anything like that. Important to note here, right, that this control, even in that short amount of verbiage, is not only technical. It's the use is to be restricted, but it's also that it should be covered by policy. So this webinar series is specifically about technical tooling to get various controls in place. But as far as the other side of that, covering it with policy, that is an area that we here at LRS are happy to help with in any way possible. Here's an example similar to one that we showed in part one. This is, I understand, probably a little difficult to make out all the text, but the point will stand that this is a scoring of a CSF alignment for an organization. This is from our vCISO program. This is the data security category under the protect function. So the idea here is that we're able to examine the different kinds of maturity, risk, and the difficulty in execution to help guide us on where we spend our time and effort and budget. What we intend to do, again, when we get over to Pat here very shortly, is to demonstrate those solutions that as we see red and as we see lower numbers, that we can identify we need to tool up a little bit, and we need to, spend wisely both our financial resources and our time to cover more of these subcategories. So similar to part one, we like to illustrate a few stumbling blocks, we'll call them, that we see across some of our customers. These can be stumbling blocks for a lot of different reasons, right? So just because it's a stumbling block doesn't mean that it's difficult to understand. And in some cases, or even maybe in a lot of cases, it's not difficult to understand. It's more just the breadth of the subcategory that can leave an organization reeling almost, right? So the very first one here listed is a great example of that, PR.AC-1. Identities and credentials are issued, managed, verified, revoked, and audited for authorized devices, users, and processes. So that's a lot to take in. It's not that difficult to comprehend when you slow down and look at it. But talking about doing that across the board and meeting that control, or putting in controls to meet this requirement, that can be daunting, right? We're talking about a lot of work in that brief sentence there. Our goal, again, is to introduce you to solutions to make all this easier, but also that will help. We're not talking about covering just a single subcategory with these solutions. We're talking about big bang for our buck and covering a wide breadth of these. Looking at the PR.AC category, we'll get into everything in this category, and we're not going to touch on them all today. I think we've established that. But when we get into this AC category, we get into everything from access control via network segmentation all the way to identity and authentication controls. So we can see that the focus today, just from the examples given here, it's more aligned with the identity and the authentication side of things. That's an area where the market continues to shift to become a bit more accessible for more and more customers. So it is still possible to do what we would call IAM, or identity and access management, without tooling, but it is to do it well and to do it accurately and repeatably. That's labor intensive, and it's like anything that's done manually repeatedly. it is prone to mistakes, to human error, be that from poor data input or inaccurate data input, all the way to just processes not being executed and falling through the cracks. On the other side of this, when we get into permissions and authorizations, and we talk about principles of least privilege, as we see in the second option here, or the second example here. Here we're getting into PAM, or privileged access management. So kind of on the other side from IAM, where we can still do things manually without it, even though there's great tooling out there that is more and more in reach. When we get into PAM, it's very difficult, and I would say almost impossible to do without some tooling. If you take a moment and kind of take a mental inventory or take stock of all the systems and the credentials and the permissions in your own organization that you could think of quickly off the top of your head, it's not necessarily realistic anymore for most organizations to do PAM, to manage privileged access without some tooling, without some investment. We'll also talk a little bit, Pat will cover some solutions around data security. And these can seem very straightforward. Data at rest is protected, data in transit is protected. Those are very brief statements, and I think they're pretty easy to understand. But what we find often, is that organizations might have some outmoded approaches to cover these controls, right? It might seem like the obvious answer to some of these types of issues is full disk encryption, and that may not give the required protection, or it may not give all the protection that's needed, or it may not be easy enough to implement even anymore. Especially when we look at alongside some of the other data security subcategories, and Pat's going to get into this in more detail. There's not enough time today, not even just in the webinar, just in the whole remaining workday, there's not enough time to talk about all the features of the Guardium lineup. But when we think data security, we definitely want to start thinking about Guardium. It's a premier product. It's got extremely impressive capabilities, and it covers a ton of the CSF controls. It's one that'll come up again and again for us. And again, there are some other examples of common stumbling blocks. The goal, again, is to give enough information here to start a conversation, right? There are 108 subcategories in the NIST cybersecurity framework. So as I turn it over to Pat here in another slide, what we're going to get into is some solution-based discussion. I encourage everyone to go have a look at the list of subcategories themselves, to take a look at all of them, because we would lose the audience to try to talk about them all through the webinar series. Remember that these are controls that were created through the cooperation of both industry and government, right? And the idea was to align these to protect organization assets, but also, it keeps an InfoSec or a cyber team ready to defend its decisions and its investments. All of our work, everybody's busy. Everybody I talk to every day is busy, and there's more work that needs to be done in a day than can get done in a day. So every time we're doing work, there's an opportunity cost. Every time we're doing work, there's some other amount of work that's not getting done. We're always at a place where we may have to defend where we are spending our time and why we are spending our time there. If we're working on things that align us to something like NIST CSF, or other good frameworks. Remember, NIST CSF, that's just our example framework that's easy to understand, right? But if we're working on activities to align to a framework, it's very easy to defend that time spent and that money. So just like last week, just want to throw these out there as common technology spaces that that the protect function works in. Just so as you're out there doing your research and you want to look for solutions or for experiences of other technologists or managers, PAM, privileged access management, is very big for the protect function, as is data access governance or data security. Of course, data encryption is a part of that. And then security, information, and event management. This one's pretty familiar probably at this point, the idea of having a SIM. But again, this is just to kind of set it up so that as you go to do your own research, that you're looking in the right spaces.
All right, so thanks everybody for joining today and listening in. So I guess much like the last conversation we had, if you're interested in exploring further any of the products that I'm going to go into here briefly, please get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to talk about them and set up some additional meetings to go through them. So the first product, and Kirk had kind of teed this up a little bit already, but the first product I'm going to go into briefly is around PAM, and specifically IBM's Verified Privilege Manager. It's one that we think, thinking back on some of the subcategories that Kirk had highlighted as being common challenges, PR.AC4 is one that having to do with principles of least privilege that we think that this solution can help with. And I'm going to think around applications for, I guess as an example here. So, how is access to applications on workstations currently decided? Or, how are admin rights removed based on who the user is, and why is it done that way? Common application control challenges that, we hear from customers include, not knowing what applications are being run today. They're dealing with various endpoint security policies. They're having rogue applications being installed by employees, as well as just managing applications that require admin privileges can be a challenge. So how can, IBM Security Solutions help with this? And I guess specifically Privilege Manager. So, let's say a local admin clicks on a malicious link and downloads malware. Their workstation then becomes instantly compromised. And once a workstation is compromised, that attacker who now has privileged access really has full control to be able to take down the network. So IBM's Verified Privilege Manager, what it's able to do is stop malware and ransomware attacks from exploiting applications by removing local admin rights from endpoints. So by automatically removing those admin rights from managed endpoints, it mitigates critical vulnerabilities. So with Privilege Manager, clients can deploy an agent to discover users and applications. They can capture all processes and discover application usage with admin rights, even on non-domain machines. They're able to define flexible policies and create dynamic allowed and denied lists, as well as gray listing policies. So what an allowed list does is it ensures that only known and trusted applications are fully supported. Denied lists denies known malicious applications based on things like attributes, file hash, location, or certificates. And then what a gray list does is it prevents unknown applications from running, and then provides a system for discovering the unknowns and adds an action that hinges on a reputation check. So it's able to determine which accounts are members of any local group, and then manage and remove those local admin rights by controlling local credentials. And when we think about really the principle of least privilege, it requires that in a particular layer of a computing environment, that every module, like a process, a user, or a program, must be able to access only the information and the resources that are necessary for its legitimate purpose. And then when we think just about privilege managers, differentiators in the PAM space, a few key points come to mind. It is something that's highly scalable. It can be quickly installed and deployed, and it provides just a greater time to value, which is really, again, kind of how we see itself. It's separating itself in the market compared to other solutions out there. And so if you were on the first part of this webinar series, you likely recognized a lot of these challenges from us talking about them last week. I think Kirk had mentioned it before, was that you're going to see kind of a lot of interchangeability, I guess, between the different NIST functions and some of the solutions that we talk about. But I think it's important, again, just to highlight the challenges that come with managing privileged credentials, and some of the risk it can cause an organization. So challenges, again, include things like not knowing where service accounts are located or how many exist, not being able to give out shared accounts without exposing passwords, not knowing who has access to what and for how long. Things like this can really cause a headache when it comes to, understanding where your privileged credentials are today and how they're going about being used and really how you go about managing them. So just as a refresher again, Privilege Vault, which we talked about on the last session, it helps organizations to discover and secure all of their privileged credentials across the enterprise in a secure vault. Besides just that discovery of privileged credentials, it provides an easy solution to be able to manage those secrets, delegate access to secrets, as well as implant control sessions. And I know this was a heavy hitter solution that we spoke about in the identity function last week, but we do think there's a lot of utility within the protect function, where Privilege Vault would apply as well, especially within some of those subcategories around managing access permissions, formerly managing assets, and then being able to verify, revoke, and audit credentials for authorized users, amongst other things. So again, just kind of wanted to give everybody a refresher on this solution here. And then, kind of the same in terms of the differentiators we talked about last time in terms of it, being highly scalable, easy to deploy, similar to Privilege Manager. Those are a lot of the similar, I guess, differentiators within this particular solution. Okay, so let's kind of move into data encryption. And when we think of just bedrocks of data security, encryption is certainly one of them. Encrypted data remains basically just worthless ciphertext without access to encryption keys. But developing encryption policies, managing encryption environments, and maintaining those keys can be really challenging. So compliance in times of big data is a major challenge, as well as data protection laws continuing to originate, and really just a desire by corporate boards to do things like stay out of the headlines due to a data breach. They're looking to protect IP and personal data, really just guard against inevitable human error. Really just simply put, unmanaged public encryption key certificates can compromise the availability of business processes. Limited skill sets also can make it really difficult to push encryption capabilities, as well as just policy management for encryption can be really challenging, and controlling policies and visibility around containers in particular. Things like this can leave an organization, really exposed and can make things challenging in terms of how do you set and maintain a strong encryption, program and encryption policies. And whether it's known or not, encryption is a key part of the IBM security portfolio. So it can help to make data unusable in the event it's hacked or stolen. Really think of encryption as the first and last line of defense that can help protect any data from full exposure. So the right encryption strategy is not only going to protect sensitive data, but it'll strengthen an organization's compliance structure as well by making data unreadable in all states, at rest or in transit. Think specifically back on what Kirk was talking about in PR.DS1 and the DS2 subcategories, which laid out requirements for data both at rest and in transit to be protected. So Guardian data encryption will protect those assets residing in cloud, virtual, big data, and physical environments with the ability to encrypt and control access to files, databases, and applications. So consistent policy enforcement is extendable to both on-prem and cloud, and it can help address a range of security and privacy mandates, whether it's GDPR, HIPAA, FISMA, CCPA, whatever sort of regulatory environments you play in. Guardian data encryption can also address compliance with strong data encryption, robust user access policies, data access audit logging, and key management capabilities. Again, whether that data is stored on-prem or in the cloud, it doesn't matter. And policies can also be defined to outline which users or groups have certain privileges and manage encryption keys, separately for the data. And then Guardian for file and database encryption in particular locks down sensitive data at rest against, attacks like ransomware. And we'll get to that in slide here in a little bit. Okay, so that was just, that was a brief kind of overview of the solution, but let's kind of begin to discuss an example of how guarding data encryption would actually work to mitigate a ransomware attack, for example. So, what does ransomware do? It scans across the data environment for sensitive files to steal and encrypt. And really, that's that's probably a good strategy for attackers to take because, I think according to a recent study from IBM, only 45% of companies have an enterprise encryption strategy today. So leaves a lot of sensitive data records out there for an attacker to snatch up, once they breach the network. So within Guardian Data Encryption, an approach to combat this would be to use whitelisting in the access control policies. So it's so important to encrypt the most sensitive data and understand where it resides. And with whitelisting controls, only a whitelisted, authorized application or set of users can access that data in clear text. And let's say in the event that a system is infected by a malicious application, what Guardian Data Encryption would do at that point would be to block that application from reading or writing encrypted files because their malware does not match the application signatures in that whitelist. Okay, I said we would talk a little bit more about Guardian file and database encryption and how it can help clients protect sensitive data wherever it resides and render it useless to attackers. So, not only is sensitive data stored across a hybrid cloud environment at risk, but also, data at rest is vulnerable to careless actions by company insiders. For example, an employee with access to sensitive data might accidentally share it in a way that violates privacy regulations, or it could alter or delete a critical file system accidentally, which can be extremely disruptive to business operations as well as just to an organization's overall reputation. So Guardian for file and database encryption in particular protects against scenarios like this via transparent encryption of files, folders, and databases, and provides users with a centralized way to set policies on who can access what pieces of information. So software agents can be installed on Windows, Linux, or other servers as well too. And then policies can then be set on what files are available to which users and applications by what processes. And then agents will enforce those policies and provide audit logging. So again, this can be kind of a really strong way to sort of, further bolster your encryption strategy and provide more granular encryption, versus, maybe sort of the traditional whole disk encryption, that we've seen organizations kind of, tend to use in the past. And again, if this is a solution that anybody's interested in hearing more about after the fact, get in touch with Kirk and I, and we'll be happy to talk through this further. Okay, so let's move on to SIM. I think there's a lot of solutions out in the marketplace that call themselves a SIM. Although they may not do everything that a SIM should do in order to be effective when it comes to threat detection and remediation. And when we think of how a proper SIM should function and how IBM thinks a proper SIM should function, there are 4 pillars that really come to mind. Being able to provide complete visibility, being able to prioritize threat detection, automating investigations, and then integrating responses to found incidents. And then IBM's QRadar, really gives customers, complete visibility into their environments by collecting data from network servers, endpoints, cloud environments, applications, and even other security tools and data lakes. It applies, advanced analytics to prioritize the most critical threats using methods like MITRE ATT&CK framework, advanced modeling, which includes things like behavioral analysis and correlation with global threat intel sources, such as IBM X-Force, for example. It automates investigations through machine learning and AI, reducing the time between threat detection and analysis. And really what this does is it allows security teams to investigate and triage threats faster, with fewer resources. It also discovers patterns, anomalies, and correlations within large data sets to predict outcomes. And it also supports federated search, which does not require data to be moved. And really, lastly, is one of the biggest concerns we hear from customers is just difficulties in finding skilled security talent. And QRadar can help augment security staff through AI-assisted triage and integrations within their source solution, which includes the ability to create and practice incident response playbooks, automate actions, orchestrate people, process technology, and automate notifications. The end goal really within the solution is to allow clients to quickly and accurately address security challenges, reduce risk, and just improve effectiveness of their IT and security staff. So kind of moving along here, QRadar is unifying SOC workflows by providing comprehensive dashboards and processes meant to simplify the process of incident detection, investigation, and response. We talked about staff augmentation capabilities on the previous slide and how the solution makes analysts more productive. But I also just want to make sure I touch on the fact that QRadar addresses regulatory risk with compliance reporting capabilities as well, including out-of-the-box reports for GDPR, HIPAA, ISO 2700, and many others as well. So the screenshot here, which I realize might be a little difficult to see, is actually an offense dashboard within QRadar that summarizes key offenses, currently active in an environment. And these can be sorted by severity or magnitude, amongst other criteria. What analysts can do from here is drill down into an offense to kick off an investigation, and quick actions can be taking place, like assigning offenses to analysts or starting to initiate a remediation workflow. I realize the slide is a little bit busy, but I thought it was just important to be able to show all the different log sources that QRadar can pull data from and derive insights from, as well as just the different use case challenges it can help address and that we see customers using QRadar for, whether it's things around advanced threats, insider threats, cloud risks, or critical data, whatever it may be. And then as you can see from the far right, QRadar is well recognized as a leader in the SIEM space and has been for quite some time. You can see the quotes at the bottom here in terms of #1 SIEM for advanced threat detection. Advanced threat defense from Gartner. So it's definitely I would say a well-respected and a trusted SIEM platform in the marketplace today. And then just a few more details on QRadar here. I think it's important just to highlight both, the amount of data sources you're able to pull logs from and analyze in QRadar, as well as the out-of-the-box detection rules. You can see here over 1,500 of them, and the analytics that are mapped to the MITRE framework. And is a few more screenshots that you can see here below, which again, I realize are a little bit hard to see. But if you're interested in seeing a little bit more of QRadar, like Kirk and I know, and we're happy to walk you through this. And then finally here, just one more slide I wanted to talk about. I know we talked last week specifically in the Guardium portfolio around Guardium data protection, and in particular its abilities to discover, classify, analyze, monitor and protect sensitive data. And I think that this is an important integration to just point out between QRadar and Guardium. The two can work together really nicely in this, two-way information flow. So event logs, can be sent from Guardium to QRadar based on suspicious activity. And in Guardium data protection, as a result of the information that's found in QRadar, policies within Guardium can be updated automatically and nearly in real time, in response to security intelligence events from QRadar. So kind of traditionally, QRadar and Guardium had this kind of one-way information flow where Guardium sends alerts and vulnerability assessment reports to QRadar. The common alerting use cases for databases were things like failed logins, unauthorized access, SQL error codes, and users trying to escalate their privileges, amongst others. But now QRadar and Guardium, again, have this great kind of, two-way information flow to, address additional use cases like blocking access from a machine that becomes compromised, increasing audit levels for access by a user ID that becomes suspicious, and then it can increase audit levels as well, by a privileged shared user ID that was onboarded within a PIM system, for example. So again, just something I kind of wanted to highlight between sort of the interconnectivity between these two solutions.